Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. I am truly honored to be amongst this galaxy of experts. All of you know much more than I do. I thank the South Asia Middle Institute for holding this conference, for Harvard University, for the thank the National Defense University and the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, and of course our own Dr. Yaqub Bangash, without which this would not have been probably possible. So I know it's late and you all have been sitting, so whenever you feel like standing up, sitting, you're most welcome to do so. Yes, what do I say after you've heard so many experts, and we're going to hear tomorrow more as well. Altogether, I think more than 40 on one topic. 75 years, and I'm told 40 minutes. So where does the journey begin? The journey began prior to 1947, when in 47 the most populous Muslim country in the world emerged on the world stage. It was then East and West Pakistan together, 132 million. Today, them together is 400 million, the population. If you want to summarize Pakistan, I try to do it. I would say the ethos of the state was Islamic, its foundations were democratic, and its structure constitutional. And when we dispensed with democracy and constitutionalism, it affected the structure, cracks appeared, and a part of us broke away. A part of us which was at a distance of 1,000 miles from us, separated by India, and it was in itself was a wonderful achievement of people separated by 1,000 miles, and they're still part of one country. Pakistan was different ethnicities, different languages, different cultures. What brought all of them together to strive for this country? It was galvanized and coalesced by the idea of freedom, women's right, unity, faith and discipline, and to be a truly Islamic welfare state. The movement for Pakistan was led by the All India Muslim League under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Central Working Committee of the All India Muslim League, which had representation, which was membership of 19 to 21 members from all parts of then British India, including my father from Balochistan. They were from Sindh, from Gujarat, they were Punjabi speaking, they were Shias, they were Sunnis, there was a woman also on the Central Working Committee, Amjadi Begum, the widow of Maulana Muhammad Ali, and women did play a considerable part in the freedom struggle. She was not the only person. Before her, the Amma, the mother of the Maulana Jawahar Ali and Maulana Muhammad Ali, there was Jahan Ana Shah Nawaz. She participated in the Round Table Conference in London in 1930. There was Fatma, there was Shaista Ikramullah, there was Shamsul Nisa Mahmood. They were all on the All India Muslim League Council. So they were distinguished ladies as well. It was not, they were liberals, they were leftists, they were rightists, they were Maulanas also, and there were virtually every ethnic group representative on that. Of course, we've spoken about Sayyid Ahmad Khan. He was a great visionary who wanted education. The classical education they were steeped in, but there were some statistics mentioned in the morning how Sayyid Ahmad Khan wanted the Muslims to join the mainstream, not remain on the periphery. We have Muhammad Iqbal, the visionary poet, and of course Jinnah, the great constitutional lawyer, probably one of the greatest of his time, and his sister Fatma Jinnah, who was a dentist by profession, an educated lady. And these four persons we have honored on the currency note issued this year, 75. It's an unusual currency note because usually you have denominations of 10. I don't know if it will be printed again. So if you have one of these, hang on to it, maybe it becomes valuable one day. So that's a little tip. So moving ahead, I like to deal with problems as well. So one of the things, one of the problematic, Yaqub has mentioned partition, a word which I don't like, but there was partition. There was not partition of British India, there was partition of Punjab, the provincial election, and there was partition of Bengal. The Muslim League won in both provinces overwhelmingly, in one by 76% of the vote and the other 69% of the vote. But the British at the 11th hour changed the promise that was held out to them under the Government of India Act of 1935 and replaced it on 11th of July 1947 by the Independence Act of Indian Independence Act of 1947. And I will just mention two sections of this act. It was section 3. So it reads, as from the appointed day, which is the 15th August 1947, the province of Bengal, as constituted under the Government of India Act, shall cease to exist. So Bengal was ceased to exist by the stroke of a pen by a government sitting in the UK, and the same was done, exact same words were used for the case of Punjab. And suddenly we had West and East Bengal and Punjab, and that was the cause of the violence. That was a cause that was, Stanley Wolpert has written a book on shameful flight. I'll just come to that. Lord Wavell was the Viceroy of British India, and he was suddenly removed and substituted by Lord Mountbatten as the Viceroy in March of the same year, who absolutely knew nothing about the subcontinent and who came here as on a picnic and left behind the mess, the terror, the killings that took place. The All India Muslim League was an utterly peaceful movement. It's a rare example of a country getting independence entirely peacefully. It is very, very rare. There was no resort to terrorism. There was no attacks on British rulers or their families. There was no attack on public or government property. There was no destruction of property. There were no attacks on any race or religion. It was an intellectual argument which was put to the electorate, and the electorate voted. It was achieved democratically. So it is fundamental to keep that in mind, that without democracy, things do go wrong, and in our case, they did go wrong. Pakistan, things started to go wrong very early on in after Pakistan came into being. First of all, we lost our leader, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, in 1948 due to tuberculosis. Liaquat Ali Khan, the Prime Minister and the close associate of Qazi Azam, was killed by an assassin, and then these two great stalwarts of the Pakistan movement we lost, and the constitution making as a consequence of that got delayed. These are the problems which India did not face. We had a constituent assembly. It was given the task to frame the constitution for the Republic of Pakistan. But that constitution assembly was dissolved on the 24th of October 1954 by a bureaucrat, Malik Ghulam Muhammad. He was an ICS officer of the Railways Department, Accounts Department of the Railways. Interestingly enough, Khwaja Nazimuddin from Bengal, who was the Prime Minister, had appointed him, and Ghulam Muhammad sacked him, dissolved the Constituent Assembly. Maulvi Tamizuddin Khan, who was also from Bengal and a Maulvi, challenged the dissolution in the then Chief Court of Sindh, which now is the Sindh High Court. The matter came before Justice Constantine, the Chief Justice, Justice Christian, Justice Villani Ismaili, Justice Mohammad Bakhsh, and Justice Mohammad Bachal, and they unanimously issued the writ of mandamus, restoring the assembly, declaring the act of dissolution as illegal and unconstitutional, and issued simultaneously writ of quo warranto against the ministers, 5 ministers that had been appointed. The matter went up to the federal court, now the Supreme Court of Pakistan, then the federal court. There we had Muhammad Munir, Chief Justice, presiding over that court. Muhammad Munir sadly had also participated in the cutting up of Bengal, as he was part of the Ratcliffe Commission, and he he set aside the unanimous judgment of the Chief Court of Sindh, and that judgment was 4-1. Justice A.R. Cornelius, who was spoken about earlier, Roman Catholic, was in the minority. But 4-1, Justice Munir's court set aside the judgment. We then had the 1956 Constitution, where we tampered with democracy by declaring parity between the East and the West wing. East Pakistan was more populous, so parity did not stand to reason, but it was through the 1956 Constitution, which did not last because once again another bureaucrat, Major General Iskandar Mirza, struck and dissolved the House, but he did not last longer. We had then General Ayub Khan, which resulted in the famous Dosos case, where I'm sad to say that the Supreme Court once again did not stand by democracy or constitutional rule, but they stood by the power of the gun. Doso case, there was nothing to support what had happened. So Muhammad Munir had to travel to Austria. Hans Kelsen, a German professor, probably unknown in the West till then, his pure theory of law was used to justify the takeover. As a consequence of that, I mean, once the rule was being concentrated not in West Pakistan, but in a dictator residing in West Pakistan who happened to be the army chief, the East Pakistanis decided to go separate ways. That's the East Pakistan debacle. The country breaks apart into two. West Pakistan becomes Pakistan, what we have, and East Pakistan becomes Bangladesh. We then, since we have, technically speaking, a kind of a new country, since we lost half of it, so we need a fresh constitution. Incidentally, Ayub Khan brought in his own constitution, 1962 constitution, and an experiment in controlled democracy, where he empowered the basic Democrats. There was not direct elections, so the basic would vote for the basic Democrats who would vote for, and his opponent, the political opponent, was Fatma Jinnah, where everyone believed that she had won the elections, but the election, I think Stalin said it's not important who casts the votes, it's important who counts the votes. So the votes were counted in favor of General Ayub. Sadly, the debacles which the country has faced didn't stop. But in 1973, we got something which had been eluding Pakistan since 47. That was a popularly constituted constitution. 200 members of parliament voted unanimously for it. There were 4 abstentions. So there was a unanimous document voted upon, which gave us the 1973 constitution of the country, and which has, though there have been various attacks on it, it has survived till date. And as long as that survives, the country survives, constitutional rule survives, democracy survives, and that's what the foundation of Pakistan is all about. It is about free from exploitation, free from practicing your faith, women's rights, protection of children, all that has been enshrined in the 1973 Constitution, what we refer to as the fundamental rights, which those in the West would refer to as human rights. But they're all fundamental rights. It is the job of the high courts, the 5 high courts now, and the Supreme Court. Their primary job is to ensure compliance of the fundamental rights, that they are not trampled or violated of any citizen or of any person who may be in Pakistan for the time being. The words from the Constitution. But though the 73 Constitution did survive in a truncated form, another adventurer, General Muhammad Ziaul, struck on 5th of July 1977, incarcerated Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the Prime Minister of the country. This resulted in another legal challenge. This became known as the Begum Nusrat Bhutto case, the famous case of Begum Nusrat Bhutto, where once again the role of the Supreme Court was with the power of the barrel of the gun. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto criminal was also tried for murder, and he was convicted. In the Supreme Court, the appeal came before 7 judges, 3 Justice Dora Patel from Balochistan, a Parsi gentleman, voted for acquittal. There was there was no evidence to convict. Justice Muhammad Halim from Karachi voted for acquittal, and Justice Safir Shah from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa voted for acquittal. But with a majority of 4, and this is again something very unusual, because when there is a split verdict in any case in a criminal matter, you don't give the maximum punishment, you give the alternative punishment, if at all you are upholding the conviction, which is punishment for life, which doesn't really mean life as in America. In our case, life is 25 years less remissions, which works out to about 19 years or so. So, but I guess, General Ziaul wanted a conviction, and later one of the persons who was on the bench, Justice Naseem Hassan Shah, in an interview admitted there was a lot of pressure on us to convict. So if we accept just his word, that will tilt the balance for the acquittal. It will become 4-3, even if we assume there was no pressure on the others. We had hoped that sordid tale of martial law would have ended by now. It did not. Another adventurer, 12th of October 1999, comes along, Parvez Musharraf, and he follows suit. Zafar Hadi Shah's case. Justice Inwarul Haq again endorses the military takeover, and we have another long period of martial law. Ayub's 10 years plus, then Ziaul's 11 years, and Pervez Musharraf's 10 years, so it's perpetually martial laws. And even when we have democracy, it has been riven with problems. Ghulam Ishaq Khan exercised a lesser known power under Article 58(2)(b), which has thankfully been done away with. He dismissed Nawaz Sharif's first government in '93, then Farooq Ahmad Khan Laghari, who Benazir Bhutto appointed as president, sacked her in 1996, and the reason given for that was that the government cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the constitution, ironically. So, first of all, it is the role of the Supreme Court till then has not been very, I cannot say that I've been very proud of. So we have had a Prime Minister assassinated, we have had a Prime Minister dismissed, we have had a Prime Minister hung, we have had a Prime Minister removed for committing contempt, and we have a Prime Minister removed for not declaring his assets. So democracy, most of the problems that have arisen in Pakistan, and which I consider is the primary cause of the breaking apart of the two wings of Pakistan, was autocratic, dictatorial rule, an absence of democracy. And where we have democracy, it has strengthened unity, and the motto of the motto of All India Muslim League was unity, faith, and discipline. A bit about me and the Supreme Court. I am a judge of the Supreme Court. Supreme Court comprises of the Chief Justice and 16 judges. At the moment, we have 14. Unlike the American Supreme Court, which hears, I think, about 120 or odd cases a year, we hear 60 a week. So in 2 weeks, we do what the US Supreme Court does. So there are 5 high courts, and we have a rare jurisdiction that in certain cases we can directly hear cases without it going through the High Court, but that is the rare power. Like I mentioned, one is the appellate power, but the most important power of the courts is to ensure that the fundamental rights are protected, the people, the citizen of Pakistan and every other person is protected. What has been enshrined in the constitution, those nobody is allowed to tamper with. The other problem which has happened is that while most governments in Pakistan, I think they spend most of the time just ensuring that they survive the 5 years. And so they really don't get down to any, like they either have direct military rule or they have interference. So they don't really get down to the real rule of governance, the real rule of things, real issues which face the people, the population control, education, public housing, public transport, women empowerment, deforestation, water conservation, climate change, and we can go on and on. So there are these, they don't really get to attend to them, and we certainly do yearn for some sort of I attended a conference in Karachi, and it was, I think, a photographic journalist who was mentioning Japan is such a boring country, nothing exciting happens. So I don't get any opportunities to take any pictures. We want a little bit of boredom. So what did the Qaid say? And the words of the Qaid and the words of the Chief Justices of this country, you'll find the similarity amongst them, and you'll be surprised when they're being said and to whom they're being said. Like one of the articles of the Constitution of Fundamental Rights is freedom of speech and expression, that's Article 19. Pakistan was one of the first signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the Article 19 is the same, freedom of speech and expression. How do we fare today? We are on the World Press Freedom Index, we are 145th out of 180. This is 2021. Hopefully next year's thing maybe have improved. Jinnah, who opposed the Press Act in the British rule. He was a member of the Imperial Legislative Council, and this is what he said. He spoke to power, quote, gagging the legitimate constitutional expression of public opinion and criticism of government, elementary rights of citizens, have destroyed all semblance of civil liberties and have, by various methods, chloroformed the press. We have seen this happening in Pakistan, not too far back in the distance, recently. While we like to hang the portrait of the Qaid in every government office, in every court, sometimes sadly we don't adhere to what he desired for Pakistan. And this is really quite a way before the Pakistan movement started. Another quote, are you going to keep millions and millions of people trodden under your feet for fear that they may demand more rights? Are you going to keep them in ignorance and darkness forever and for all ages to come, because they may stand up against you and say that we have certain rights and you must give them to us? Is that the feeling of humanity? So very powerful words. Is that the feeling of humanity? Is that the spirit of humanity? It is the elementary right of every man to say, if he is wronged, that he is wrong, that he should be righted. This he's saying 110 years ago. History has reminded us, tells us that totalitarian regimes suppress the press and impose censorship, but they don't really last, but they cause immense damage, immense hurt, immense sadness. A free and robust press is the backbone of democracy. I sincerely believe it, and it serves both as a conscience and a mirror. And now I'll just compare what was being said in the US at that time. In 1913, Louis Brandeis, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, says, and we say it all the time, but you may not know where the source is, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants, electric light the best of policemen. A little later, Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1929, quote, if there is any principle of the Constitution that more imperatively calls for attachment than any other, it is the principle of free thought, not free for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought we hate. But freedom for the thought we hate. Before I became a judge, I would write occasionally articles, and one of my articles was Freedom for the Thought We Hate, quoting Oliver Wendell Holmes. We are in Harvard, so it may be appropriate to quote a Harvard professor, and those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. This is George Santayana in his book Reason and Common Sense, published in 1905. Another one of our problems is there used to be a lot of quotable quotes from earlier American judgments. I don't know, some things have recently changed in the US as well. And it does not only affect us, but I think it does send a message to the world. I'm sure you have strong feelings about Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which sort of undermined Roe and Wade 50-year ruling, and Planned Parenthood, and Casey, which was 1992, which endorsed Roe versus Wade. The decision was a split decision, 6-3, and the and how do I say it impacts us? We have a very fast-growing population. It is 220 million. And like I mentioned earlier, in 1947, both East and West Pakistan combined were 32 million. So something has to be done. And judgments like maybe what's happening here do impact us, because since religion is important in our faith, this is one of the things which has not been mentioned in the Holy Quran, but the ulama had no problems with contraception or with the fetus being wasted till about 16 weeks. So this is kind of established main school Islamic jurisprudence. So in the three, there's another recent judgment of the U.S. courts, and that may also impact others, and that is the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, this year's case, where the constitutionality of a 1911 Act, which had stood the test of time for over a century, and that you could not carry an unrestricted licensed weapon concealed unless you could show proper cause or a special need. And the American Supreme Court held that this was unconstitutional. Again, judgment of 6-3. The usual suspects, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan in the minority. And main judgment by Justice Clarence Thomas, and Justice Alito adds, would it prevent mass shootings? So that's the question, I don't know, it's not for me to answer, but that's the question he posed, which one could say, yeah, probably it would. So there you are. We have also had to deal with mass shootings, not quite, but terrorism most certainly, and frightening thing is the terrorism database, global terrorism database index for a period of about from 1970 to 2019 recorded that there were 1,000 attacks on schools in Pakistan. I'll just give you the kind of things that I'm not really proud of what the Supreme Court does, and now I'll tell you something that we are proud of and what we do. There was a school, Sangota Public School in Swat. You must have all heard of Malala Yousafzai. And this was a girls' school. It was closed because I think it was the TLP which had bombed it, and it had remained closed. And the matter came up to the Supreme Court in some other context, but what I thought one could write about was the very futility, the falsehood of the argument being put forward that education, restricting girls from education is somehow Islamic. There can be no bigger lie than this. The very first word of the Holy Quran is Iqra, which means read, and it is not restricted to men, it is to men and women. And the same verse goes on to talk about the pen and knowledge and ilm, qalam and ilm. So religion was used to put to rest a false narrative that had been developed, that this is absolutely prohibited. Examples were given of the wife of the Prophet, who was the narrator of like 3,000 hadiths, and she taught in a mosque as well. So another example of using, putting right what was being done wrong was the example of the Prophet was cited in another case. And when we have something called the probation where if you commit a sort of a lesser offense, you, rather than being incarcerated in prison, you can be put under the sort of supervision of a probation officer. And but the West has now started using, I'm not sure if this concept exists in the US, it does exist in Europe and the UK, it's community service orders, that you do something for the community if you sort of, you kind of free time you spend in community depends on what your skill is. So the matter came before us whether one could use the concept, because it said probation officer and the court may pass any order. It did not specifically provide for a community service order. So here again, the importance of education was pointed out by the fact that in one of the very earliest battles, that was the Battle of Badr, the prisoners that were taken, the non-Muslim prisoners who were fighting against the Muslims, that were taken by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were allowed to gain their freedom if they taught 10 persons. So this was used to project a community service order, and in fact, I think probably this is the world's first example of a community service order that you teach and you gain your freedom. In that case, it was a case of two markhors, which are featured. They have shown the first side of the 75 rupee note. On the reverse side, you'll see there is the national animal of Pakistan, the markhor, which has like a screwdriver, sort of horns like this. And that person was an agriculturist, so he was asked to plant, I forget the number of trees, 200 trees, and take care of them for 2 years. So that was the community service order that was used to do that. Sadly, there has been a lot of terrorism and it has affected judges as well. The senior puisne judge of Baluchistan High Court, Justice Nawaz Mari, was killed while going to court. Justice Maqbul Bakr, my colleague, who was a judge of the Supreme Court, has retired recently. He was set upon by terrorists, and I don't know how he survived. I went to see him in hospital, and he was a chain smoker, and he did not stop smoking, and smoke was coming out from every part of his body. I did not know whether to cry or to laugh, because it was so. I don't know how he survived with a suicide bomber. Recently, Justice Muhammad Noor Miskanzai of the Baluchistan High Court, Chief Justice, former, retired, and then Chief Justice of the Federal Shariat Court, he was killed by the BLA. In Baluchistan, they have claimed responsibility. I came under an attack, but luckily survived in Baluchistan. So it is, and when did this all happen? And the people of Pakistan were never asked which wars do they want to participate in. General Ziaul on a phone call from somewhere would decide to determine what the foreign policy of Pakistan should be and in which war it should be involved. And he goes away, but that is left, and the scars and the continuation of the violence, it doesn't go away. Pakistan became awash with Kalashnikovs, heroin. You've never come across these things, what they were. As a consequence of the involvement, then very much supported by this country. So there were consequences, but it was never put to any to the National Assembly or to any political decision making that whether we should do this or not. Yes, we managed to bring down the Soviet Union, and probably America was successful in demolishing its chief rival, but we lost a lot too and continue to do so. So it is not just democracy. Here you can see that when there is democracy, it can be messy. You have to agree with people, you have to disagree with people, you have to talk to them, you sort of, eventually some consensus develops, and at least you can then blame the country that you have decided this. When an autocrat decides to invade a country, can you really blame the country? I mean, would you blame the Germans for Hitler? I don't think so. It's not fair. But if you are democratically elected and you declare war, yes, then you can probably blame the country. So sometimes these, the consequence of these, I mean, I would even venture a bit further and say we impose sanctions on countries. But those people, the poor people are suffering there as well. If it's a democratically elected government, then of course sanctions should be imposed, whether it would have any effect or not, or they would become even more powerful and the people would suffer. These are just questions. So I've discussed one American case. I would discuss another American case and just show where Pakistan and the US kind of thinking was similar at one stage. Probably it's not so much today with the courts, I'm saying, and this is no disrespect. I mean, everyone is entitled to their way of thinking. And this is again this year's case, West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency. And this was the EPA had proposed a clean power plan to regulate carbon emissions. Once again, 6-3 the vote. I mean, it's almost you can decide the case before it is heard what the outcome will be, which is very surprising for me. Incidentally, I should just mention the American Supreme Court 9, they sit together and decide everything. In Pakistan, it doesn't happen that way. Rarely it does. One or two instances it has happened. For instance, even the 21st Amendment was challenged. 21st was the on military civilian trials by military courts. I think that was where we all 17 of us sat together and to hear the matter. But generally there are benches ranging from 2, 3 to 5 or even 7, and the discretion is with the Chief Justice, the constitution of the bench. It is not the entire court. So coming back to West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency of the US, and this I would read from the minority view. Quote, and this is Eleanor Kagan and her very eloquent, reasoned dissent. Some have accused me of dissenting too much too. And she writes, whatever else this court may know about, it does not have a clue about how to address climate change. And let's say the obvious, the stakes are high. The court appoints itself instead of the expert agency, the decision maker on climate change, on climate policy. I cannot think of many things more frightening. The Supreme Court judge, and why do I mention climate change? I don't know if there is any other currency note in the world. Ours mentions climate, saving climate and species. So it's written here on this 75 rupee note. I hope it does matter and we can carry this message forward. In sharp contrast, a colleague of mine, Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, in a recent judgment regarding mentioned climate change in a very almost an opposite context, and this is the CDA, the Capital Development Authority, which is the organization which pertains to land in Islamabad Capital Territory, and it quote, the CDA shall ensure to factor in adaptation, climate. I'll say it again. Quote, in the face of grave existential threat of climate change, adaptation, climate resilience, and sustainability assume the role of a constitutional necessity and of an overarching constitutional obligation. Climate change is not mentioned in the Constitution, nor is environment mentioned as a fundamental right, but these rights, we have extended the definition of the right to life, dignity of man, by incorporating that without these things it would not be possible. Right does not mean the right of mere existence, of just mere living. So we have been pushing the envelope innovating, hopefully in a positive fashion. Probably you'll be better judges of that, because after all, the real issue before us is whether the human race survives or not, and everything else kind of fades into insignificance. Paul Crutzen, the Nobel Prize, the atmospheric chemist who won the Nobel Prize, coined the phrase the age of Anthropocene, or the age of humanity. Why humanity? Because it is humanity is now influencing, it has become the dominant planetary force in contributing to emissions. The world existed, was in perfect order till humanity learned to burn fossil fuels, and the consequences of which Pakistan has suffered, and suffered acutely and very recently. There were floods in 2010, but these ones, we thought those were the massive floods, and the ones what happened now, the rainfall that came and the floods and the devastation it has caused, the loss of lives, the loss of homes, I don't know, 1.7 million, few thousand people dead, millions of capital lost, and there is still water standing in large tracts of Sindh. So I would use this forum to draw all your attention to what is happening. Pakistan has become now one of the world's most vulnerable countries regarding climate change, and whatever you can do, you must contribute, if you can, to by writing about it or by monetarily. I think your compatriots back home definitely who are suffering from the consequences of something which they had no hand in doing. We don't even contribute. We contribute less than 1% of global emissions. So it is, at least this one is not our fault. And this is something which is extremely important. There's a gentleman from New Zealand here, and where is the gentleman from New Zealand?
He just left.
He just left. Okay. And there's so much to learn from nature. And I was telling him about we just talk about climate change. There is another dimension, the species protection, and we have a little bird here. We thank Yaqub for telling us what this bird was about. There's another bird called the bar-tailed godwit. It's a bird which travels from Alaska to. They had put a chip, a 5-gram chip. The bird weighs 600 grams, about a pound, and it travels all the way. This last flight was the longest uninterrupted flight. The bird did not stop on the way, did not eat or drink anything. 11 days, and it reached Tasmania in Australia. 8,500 miles. This little bird. Just imagine the knowledge that is possessed there. How did it know where to travel? How to find its way? And sort of how much knowledge we are losing by wasting, by destroying species. There was a case in Pakistan, unfortunately I was in the minority, on the Bugara bustard. That's a long story. I don't know if I'm running out of time, so I'll conclude here, because if you get me started on environment, it won't stop. So I would like to thank the organizers once again, but I must thank the participants, because without them there would be no conference. So thank you everyone, and for being my teachers today, and hopefully tomorrow as well.